In this video, we will complete our dispatcher project by editing the get transaction data and the process transaction workflow. So let's start with the get transaction data workflow. In the project panel, look for the get transaction data, double click to open it. And here, the first thing that we need to do in here is we need to check the first run of the get transaction data workflow because we need to navigate to the system 1 application work items page. So to do that, we will be adding an if activity. So look for an if activity in your activity tab. And here we will be updating the activity label name. So if the transaction number is 1, so here for the condition, we will be using our in transaction argument. And for the condition, if it's equals to 1. And for the then block, um, we will invoke the system 1 navigate to work items workflow. So go to the project tab and look for the system 1 navigate to work item workflow and drag that in the then block of our if activity. So it has arguments, so we need to assign it. So for this, this is navigate to work items. So we need to use the setting for our work items URL. So just copy that key name and again use the in config argument, provide the key name and convert it to string. Hit OK after doing that. So that navigate to work item should only happen once, and that is when the transaction number value is equals to 1. So next step here is we need to check if the target page exists in the system 1 page. So once we are here, we need to check if the transaction number is equals to the active page or equals to the page here in our work items page. So first we need to add an element exists activity. So look for the element exists and drag that after the if activity. So for this, we will be using, I will update the label first. So we will be checking the target page and we will indicate the first page. So the one, and we need to edit this selector. So open UI Explorer and for the selector, we will select the A tag. Make sure that you have the A tag selected, not the LI tag. And we will be adding the parent class attribute. And then for the inner text, we will also add the inner text and make sure to uncheck the AA name. We will be just using the inner text. But for the inner text value, instead of using a hard-coded value, we will be using our in argument, which is the transaction number. So using the double open curly braces, type in the in transaction number argument name and close it with the double curly braces and hit validate. So this is not validating because we don't have a default value for the in transaction number argument, but for the meantime, let's just hit the save and we can test that if we put default value to in transaction number, like for example if I put uh, 1. So now if we edit the selector, that is now validating, but let me remove that before I forgot. So for the output of this element exists activity, we will create a variable and we will name it page exists. So next to that, we will be adding another if activity to validate if the target page exists. So for this activity, let me update the label name first. For the condition, we will input the page exists variable. So if the page exists, we need to add an activity that will click or activate the page. So it is not mentioned in the guide, but it a precondition before executing the workflow in the process transaction state that the target page should already open. So we need to add a click activity, and here we need to indicate the page number element. So let's target yep, let's target this. And we need to edit this selector similar with what we did with the element exists activity. So open the UI Explorer. Alright, why it goes there. So here we will again uncheck the AA name and use the inner text, and make sure again that you are on the A tag. Then add the parent class attribute, and for the inner text again we will be using our in transaction number argument, and hit validate, but it should not be valid because we don't have a value for that argument yet. And this should be our selector for that click activity. So just hit OK after doing the selector update. And we can also test that selector if it's working or not. So let's try to assign a different page number, maybe 4. And if we click edit selector, that should be valid. But if we try to assign a page number that does not exist in this page, like 13, let's try to add 13. Then if we check our selector, that should no longer be valid. So hit OK. It means that our selector is working fine. And that is all that we need for this workflow. Let me check if there's something that we need to assign here. Okay, so before I forgot, we also need to assign the transaction number to the out transaction item um, argument. So here in the then block of our ePage exists, I will add an assign activity, and I will just label it, update the label name that it will be assigning to the out transaction item argument. So for the to field, we will be assigned the out transaction item argument, and for the volume field, it should be our transaction number, and we need to convert it to string because our transaction item argument is of type string. So that will be our assign activity for the then block. And for the else block, we also need to uh, have an assign activity. I will just copy this and paste here. So for the else block, if the page no longer exists, we need to set this out transaction item to nothing. And delete this activity as we don't need it anymore. So this should be our final get transaction data workflow. All right, so make sure to hit the save button, and also make sure that you don't have any default value in your arguments in the arguments tab. So after that, save and close this workflow. We will be working next on the process transaction. So for the process workflow, that is inside again the framework folder. So double click to open the workflow. And in this workflow, we first need to check if the system one active page is equals to the current transaction number. So on the work item page, if you will notice, the page number link indicate whether it is an active page or not. So in UiPath Studio, let's start by adding an element exists activity. And here we can also update it to target page. So let's indicate the so you can see that page number one is the current active page because it has a different design or style. So we will select that element and let's edit the selector and open the UI Explorer. And in here, you can see that the element has a class value page number current, indicating if the link is active. So we need to add this attribute to our selector and make sure to uncheck the AA name attribute. And for the inner text, we will replace it, or let's add the inner text first. So for the inner text value, we will replace it with the in transaction item argument. If you remember, this transaction item variable at this stage now contains the transaction number value or the page number. So after doing that, we can validate the selector, and of course it should not be valid because we don't have a default value for that variable, but just hit the save button and hit OK. If we will try, if we put 1 in this transaction item argument, and if we check our selector, this is now valid because page 1 is the current active page. But if we, for example, try to assign 2 for the default value, our selector should not be valid anymore. So let's remove that default value again before I forget. So for the output property of this activity, we will create a variable and we will name it page is active. And next to that, we will add an if activity, just an if, and we will validate here if the page is active. So for the condition, we will use the page is active variable. And for the then block, if the page is active, then we will invoke the scrape data table workflow. So go to the project in the system1 folder, drag the scrape data table workflow, and click import arguments and assign it to the out. Um, we will create a DT work items variable so that the data table output of this workflow will be assigned to this variable. Hit OK after doing that. And next, we will invoke the filter work items workflow next to the scrape data table. And here, click import arguments. And for these, we need to assign the so in this part, um, do we still need to call this? I'm sorry, no. This should not be the work items data table. I'm sorry, I got confused. Delete that. After the script data table, the next workflow that we need to invoke is the filter work items data table. So click the import arguments, and we have 4 arguments here. For the type, we will use WI4. For the data table, we will use the DT work items variable that we created previously. For the out filter data table, we can also assign that to DT work items variable. Now for the status, it should be open. So just type open in there and hit OK. So after we have the data table available and we filter it to the WI port type and open status, the next step is to send those items to the queue by invoking our populate queue workflow. So drag that and here click import arguments. for the WI for items, we just need to assign the DT work items variable. And for the queue name, we have that in the configuration file. So copy this key name and let's use the in config argument and assign our orchestrator queue name. So hit OK after making the changes. And now we can test the project. So save, make sure to save that and close this workflow. So before we start, make sure to analyze and validate the project just to make sure that there is no error within our project. And another thing, make sure to log out from the system one. Don't just close it, log out first and then close the system one page. And also make sure that your configuration file is closed, but make sure to save it first for the recent update and then close it. Now we can test this project by clicking the run button. So hit run and let's see if this will be successful. So now it navigates to the system one and do the login process. Then it should go to the work items page and here we can see that it's transitioning to the different page of my work items page. So it seems that our project is working as we are expecting it. So your page number might be different from my number of page here because that depends on the page data that you get. So don't worry if you have, for example, 14 or 15 pages in there, or you may only have 7, 8, or 9 pages in there. So let me wait to finish this project so that if I got any error, you probably would get an error as well. Now it's in the last page and all the generate yearly report items should now be sent to the orchestrator queue. And we will check that this after this run. I'm not sure why it is taking some time in here, but I hope there's no any error. All right, it lagged out successfully, and here we don't see any indication of an error. It has it processed 12 transaction number because we have 12 pages. So if you have like 14 or 15 pages, you may see process transaction number 14, 15 in there. So it took almost 20 or 2, it took only 2 minutes to complete the dispatcher part. What we can do is to validate if the the work items are sent to queue. So let's navigate to our orchestrator and I noticed that our project did not close the system one page. I think we forgot to add the close tab activity. So later we will work on that, but let's first check if the items were successfully sent. So in the orchestrator, um, okay, it's taking some time to load. So go to the shared folder and go to the queues tab. And here you should see remaining transaction, but I don't see any in my end. But don't worry if that happens. There's another way to check. You can click this ellipsis button and select view transactions. And here you will see that we have items in here. So most of the times there is a delay Well, that is why it's not immediately showing here. But if you check the transactions and if you see items in here, it means that the project or the dispatcher is successful. So we have like 13 items in here. And if you want to check each item, you can click again the ellipsis and view the details. And here you will see the three columns that we define in the add queue activity, the WIID type, the status, and it contains the proper value for each column. All right. So that means that our dispatcher project is successful. But before I end this video, I want to fix one of the uh, miss that I made. So open your System 1 close workflow, and in this workflow, we forgot to call the close tab activity. So let's start by adding an attached browser activity first. So look for an attached browser activity and make sure that you have the system one open and in the login page. So here I will just update the label name and indicate the system one login page, edit the selector, and we don't need to change that, so we just hit OK. So inside this attached browser activity, look for the close tab activity and drag that in the do section of our attached browser activity. So hit the save button, and that's all that we need for that workflow, because if you notice in our run, it was not able to close this system one page. Alright, so now that we had a successful dispatcher test and dispatcher project, we can now work on the performer part of this exercise. So I'll see you on the next video for that one. Please, again, if you're liking this video, please hit the like button and you can visit my site. I will put the link in the description of this video. You can use this site as reference in completing the dispatcher and performer part of the generate yearly report exercise. So again, see you on the next video for the performer process.